What is going on, everybody? Welcome to our next positional rankings video for the 2026 NFL Draft. Today, I'll be talking about my top 10 cornerbacks for the upcoming draft, a draft that everybody says is a bad draft class. And look, man, I'll be honest, this is a good cornerback class. It's got top-end talent. It's got plenty of depth to talk about here today. As long as you don't need a quarterback or a running back, this is a pretty damn good draft coming up here in a couple weeks. So I'm excited to talk about this position group here. I'm not going to say this is the best year ever if you need a cornerback, but it's a good year to need a cornerback. And we've got some fun names to discuss here today. As we get started here, I do want to ask you guys, please do take a second to hit that like button down below. Make sure you subscribe for all of my positional rankings. And of course, be here for the live stream here. Within a couple of weeks, I will be live giving my reactions and analysis to every single pick. And I want to thank a brand new partner for the channel, the sponsor for today's video, Prize Picks, who we'll hear from a little bit later on in the video. But let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin at the bottom of the list with my number 10 cornerback, and it is going to be out of the University of Texas, Malik Muhammad. Now, before we do talk about him here, I do want to lay the groundwork for the players we're going to be talking about here today, and note that this year I have separated true nickel players into their own position group. I don't know if I'm going to get to a nickel rankings video, but you can find my write-ups, my rankings for who those true nickel defenders are on my draft guide that's over on my Patreon. So if you're looking for maybe some guys like Keontae Scott, for example, he's not going to be in today's video. Though, back to Malik Muhammad, I do actually have a higher grade on him than Keontae Scott. I'm a little bit lower on what I saw from Scott in coverage. I think that's probably the biggest name that isn't going to make this video that the comments are going to be chirping about here. But with that out of the way, let's talk about Malik Muhammad out of Texas. And he's just a really nice, balanced, kind of more raw but moldable ball of clay. Someone that I think we're talking about is a third-round pick, but a player that has solid size. 5'11", 187 pounds, some of the best arm length that we'll talk about here on this list, the 32.5-inch arms. He's a good athlete. He's got the speed. He's got the acceleration. He's got the oily hips, which, chat, start the oily hips counter for today's video because it's the top 10 cornerbacks video. You know we're talking about some oily hips, but he's got all of the boxes checked from a athletic standpoint. I think the 4.42 speed does show on tape. And I think at that balanced size with all of the athleticism, he can play outside, but he also potentially projects as someone that you can mold as a true slot for you as well, because he's got the foot speed to match smaller slots, but he's got the length and he plays really physical against the run. He's a little bit skinny right now, but I do think there's room on his frame to bulk up, maybe get up to 195, even 200 pounds, especially if we're adding it in his arms. And you can absolutely ask this guy to fill the run, to occasionally take on tight ends in the run game. I think he has the requisite physicality to do that. It's just sometimes you see he's a little bit skinny in the play strength side of things. Well, he would benefit from being a little bit stronger. And I think that's very much like he's got the runway to do that, especially with his age. So it's not an insult, especially in this case, to say that he could be a slot for you. That's just added flexibility and makes him even more of a moldable ball of clay. And that's really why I love my high-end pro comp for him, which is Deommodore Lenoir, who's like an $18 million, if not more than that, per year player for the 49ers, who was a day 3 pick, plays at about 5'11", 200 pounds, and he's got the physicality, the inside-out flexibility. He's a really nice asset for the Niners. I think Malik Muhammad, in a best-case scenario, could be molded into something like that type of player. But as he played at Texas, I think he absolutely has enough size. The arm length is nice, the speed. He can match up on the outside for sure. Now, I don't think you want Malik Muhammad starting right away. his tape is extremely inconsistent, and it basically all comes back to technique with him. You watch his feet, whether he's mirroring press or sometimes he stops his feet when he's trying to match route breaks down the field. In those instances, he can get a little bit too dependent on those long 32.5-inch arms and tug and pull a little bit, be a little bit too dependent on his grabbiness around that 10-yard area, whereas he has plenty of athletic ability and quickness with his feet to trust better technique if he could develop it. Even in his zone coverage, you see him kind of open up and turn in the wrong direction, creating some of those blind spots in zone, which is easy to clean up. There's just a lot of different areas of his tape where you're like, we got to clean that up, that up, that up, that up. And that's why he's a third-round pick and more of a developmental player. But with a good secondary coach, with the right development path ahead of him as still a very young player, I think the moldability of this player is really desirable in the third round, where you know you're not going to hit on every pick, but you're looking for certain traits, and a young player that doesn't have bad tape, like it's just inconsistent tape. There's actually some really exciting flashes, yes, with some of the man stuff, but I think there's a lot of reps where he shows like good zone IQ, where from cover 3, he has really good spacing. He can read and react to routes as they develop around him, navigate his way in front of throwing lanes and jump balls, and he had pretty solid production. Only got his hands on 4 balls this year, but he did break up 9 passes starting as a true sophomore at Texas. So again, there's some really good flashes in there. He can really do a little bit of everything, and you're hoping you can get him to be better at everything. So he landed inside my top 10 there. That is Malik Muhammad out of Texas. And then if you were looking at the graphic there for Malik Muhammad, you did notice he was actually tied with my number 9 cornerback here with the same grade as my number 9 player here, but giving an ever so slight nod to my number 9/9A corner, Davison Igbinosun out of Ohio State. So with that same grade, talking about a third round cornerback here again. And Igbinosun has some similarities to Muhammad, but some different differences as well. He is a very lengthy corner, 6'2", even longer arms, almost 33-inch arms there, 32 7/8, the official measurement there. He is also a little bit skinnier, 189 pounds at 6'2", so he's on the lanky side, which is becoming more and more common for these college corners. But we're talking about a longer corner here. I don't think Igbinosun is as quick as Muhammad, or I don't think he has that slot flexibility necessarily to slide into the inside. But if you're looking for a bump and run outside press man corner, Igbinosun's gonna be pretty high on your list, especially if you miss out on some of the higher ranking guys that we're gonna talk about here today. He did that at Ohio State and did it well. His length was a real problem, especially for college receivers, but he's got that press jam mentality. He's got really good speed to run with guys down the field for such a longer corner. Now, because his feet are not as quick, when you've got that longer frame, you don't always have that foot speed and the oily hips and the easy change of direction. So when he's got his back turned and he's on the trail and he's trying to stay attached and mirror a wide receiver's route breaks, he does depend on his physicality and grabbing the opponent as opposed to keeping those feet moving, matching the route break, turning, keeping pace. It's to the point that Dane Brugler wrote in his Beast draft guide, which shout out to Dane Brugler, who does amazing work. He wrote down that Igbinosun, they started to give him oven mitts in practice to stop him from grabbing so much. And to his credit, he reduced the number of penalties he drew this year. He went from 16 penalties as a starter in 2024 down to 5, which is still above average for a college corner, but got a little bit better. So you'd like to see some of that development, and I do think his coverage ability was better and more consistent there. So he's got the right development trajectory, and look, even if he gets flagged, we know they don't call it every time, and there's a lot of teams that are totally fine with a lengthy corner that's going to get penalized 12 times a year. There's actually a handful of guys that we consider top 10 to 15 corners that make a living off of that. So it is what it is. He'll probably always be a little bit grabby because he doesn't have the feet to keep up all the time. But are they going to call it all the time? No, we know that they're not. But some teams are more content with that style of corner than others, to say the least. But needless to say, I think this is someone that's got, a decently high floor in terms of being a bump and run press man cornerback. So if you're the Lions, if you're the Jets, if you're the Chiefs, and I know a common comment is for me to put those best landing spots on the graphic here. Look, we only got so much space. It's a lot of work to do that for every single player here, but I try to shout out some of the best fits through the spoken analysis here. Those true press man teams are certainly going to have Igbinosun circled on early third round. So much so that I think the Chiefs, like 9th pick in the third round or whatever, there's a pretty damn good chance that he's going to go there. In fact, my pro comp on him is Jalen Watson, who just left the Chiefs. Now, the NFL is a zone league, and even the man-heavy teams are only running man 30, 40% max. So even the man-heavy systems are still going to be primarily zone teams. And Davison Igbinosun is not a great zone corner yet, especially from off zone, which those quarters match principles, which so many teams are basing their system around. The Vic Fangio, Mike McDonald, Robert Saleh tree, like any coach in those systems, they want a match quarters off zone corner to be able to do that kind of stuff. And Igbinosun's just not really great in space like that. Like we said, he's better when he's in a guy's hip pocket and he can stay attached and float that arm out there with those subtle grabs. When he is asked to play match quarters from off-zone coverage, he doesn't have the click and close ability. He's not super comfortable reading and reacting out in space like that. So he is going to be much more of a system-dependent corner for so many teams. Now, his actual spot drop zone stuff, which is going to be cover 3, cover 2, I think he did show a workable baseline of understanding route combinations, taking stuff away, communicating, jumping plays, that kind of stuff. I think there's certainly, the press man systems, a lot of times when they call zone, it's going to be more of those spot drop, cover 3, single high types of looks. He can do that. I just don't see him as a match off-zone quarters system fit. So some players on this list are more scheme dependent than others. Igbinosun absolutely is going to be more of those press, jam, in-your-face, physical, kind of grabby corners. And with his size, it's also worth mentioning, very good active run defender as well, which we know pretty much every coach is going to value. So that's another plus for Igbinosun. Now, before we go to our next player here, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video and a brand new partner for the channel, Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks platform, #1 daily fantasy platform. Their app is easy to use, picking more or less on any number of player stats. String together your lineups for the chance at massive payouts. In select states, Prize Picks even has team picks where you can select the winner, the spread, and total on any major game. And what I'm really excited about partnering with Prize Picks is you can now follow me like a social media platform on the Prize Picks app. Follow along with my lineups. That is going to be at @TFG_football. I will be building baseball lineups throughout the summer. I have reestablished my love of the game for baseball, and a platform like Prize Picks is a big part of that. Putting together a lineup to enjoy these games every day with a chance at payouts. And when football season rolls around, we're going to be putting our football knowledge to the test with a chance to win some money there. So download the Prize Picks app. The code is going to be HMA when you sign up, or just click that description down below. With that code, you will get $50 in lineups when you play just $5. And again, track my username there at TFG_football as we move forward. So excited to partner with Prize Picks. Thank you for sponsoring today's video, and let's get to our next player. And then before we hop to number 8 here, I do just want to remind you guys real quick, as you're listening to me talk or you're looking at the graphics on the screen, if you scroll down to the description down below, there is a link to a Google Doc where you can see what all of these different terms mean to me and what I'm looking for when I fill out these grades in these evaluations. So if you're trying to learn a little bit more about scouting corners, or you just want to be on the same page with what you're hearing me talking about, because some people have different terms for different stuff, I just want to remind you guys that is in there, or it's in my draft guide as well. Again, if you want to support the channel and get all of my write-ups, not just my top 10 corners, but right now I've watched about 27 cornerbacks. Some of those are in with the nickels. But if you think anybody got snubbed from this list and you want my opinions on those guys, I do encourage you guys to check out the draft guide and the draft access over on my Patreon as well. But with that, let's go to my number 8 cornerback, and this is Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. A little bit of a mixed bag for me with Cisse. He's very green. He hasn't played much football. He's played just over 1,000 snaps. I think it's 1,001 career snaps at South Carolina. He's declaring as a true junior, and he was kind of a full-time starter for the first time this year, but even then he would come off the field, which some of these corners would get a drive here or a drive there to catch their breath. Other corners would be out there for every snap. Cisse was a starter, but he would get 2 or 3 drives off a game and ended up with, I think, close to 600 snaps in this final year at South Carolina. But there are some of those more raw moments with him, especially when they would put him in like a zone assignment or from quarters. I think there's a lot of kind of mental understanding of route combinations and how to anticipate stuff with his eyes facing the quarterback a little bit more. There's just a lot to teach this guy. But there's a lot to like in his tape as well. He's just under 6 feet tall, 5'11 and a half. He's just under 190 pounds, 189, close to 31-inch arms. So very, very solid size. And he's kind of high cut. Like, he plays even above those listed measurables. When you watch him play, he plays a little bit more of that big physical brand of cornerback. And he certainly plays stronger than that listed weight there. You know, he's pretty close to like Muhammad. If you're just looking at the 5'11", 187, 189 pounds, they're like very close. But you watch these guys play, and Cisse just does play a lot stronger, and that shows in his press jams. It shows in his ability to kind of bump with bigger wide receivers down the field. It absolutely shows in his run defense, where Cisse is one of the better, stronger, more active run defenders at the cornerback position in this draft. And he misses his fair share of tackles, but it's not for a lack of effort or play strength. There's just, he's got to square up a little bit better and improve his technique there, but he's got a lot of potential as a edge setting cornerback, which does matter. Maybe not as much as the cover stuff, of course, but it's a good thing to have in your back pocket, and I don't question that very much with Cisse. What I do question is some of the movement skills for him. He ran a 4.41 at his pro day. I saw some SEC wide receivers stacking him on the outside. It was good to see the 4.41 speed, but I don't know that he consistently plays up to it. I think he is a little bit heavier footed in terms of matching footwork off the line or within routes. Certainly when he would play off quarters, he doesn't have that nice, snappy, top-down route squeeze where he's playing 10 yards off and a receiver either breaks on an in route, an out route, a comeback, or he processes it very quickly mentally, but physically speaking, his body's just a little bit behind where it needs to be in terms of just having that nice, snappy, athletic ability at this position. He just doesn't quite have all of the movement skills you want to see, and that with the youth, it just slides him down a little bit, but you love the physicality. He's got enough speed. I don't want to say he's slow, but I just don't know that he's quite got 4.41 speed in there. Like maybe 4.46, 4.47 would have matched the eye test a little bit more. And I think that also applies, by the way, to his jumps. I mean, he blew the combine away with a 41-inch vertical jump and a 131-inch broad jump. Again, I don't see the burst and acceleration that a lot of times those jumping numbers can allude to. It's good to know that all that is in there, but where is it on tape? It doesn't quite show. So it's just one of those things that you're hoping it's in there a little more consistently, but you're not drafting him counting on it either. Now, to say something really nice about Brandon Cisse is we've talked about how like Igbinosun and Malik Muhammad, they don't really trust their eyes. They get a little bit too grabby. They don't trust their feet. I think Cisse's ability to not panic in phase, to react to route breaks when he's on the trail, when he's got his back to the quarterback, he processes what he's seeing very quickly. It's just with his youth and inexperience, some of the zone stuff, he might be registering stuff quickly. He just doesn't quite know what he's supposed to be looking for, if that makes sense. But especially in the man-to-man stuff, like he'll be right in a guy's hip pocket, right in phase. That receiver will break off a post or break off the corner, and he registers that break instantaneously as if he knew the play before it happened. Like he has really good mental response time, which is really important at this position, and it helps him register a lot of impressive coverage reps, even if he doesn't always have the outstanding feet and hips and change of direction ability to stay attached down the field. And if you're not following everything I'm talking about here, to put it more simplistically, he's just a stickier corner because of his technique in that sense than the first two guys we've talked about. So even if he hasn't played a ton, there's a lot of aspects of the game where he's pretty cleaned up and is pretty composed and maybe a little bit more play now ready than the two guys we've talked about. And then he is still young. If he does really develop like elite zone IQ on top of some of the really good stuff he does as a bump and run corner already, you could be talking about maybe someone like Christian Benford for the Bills, who's not an elite athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but has good length, good technique, and has proved to be a really good, not just bump and run guy when the Bills want him to do that, but a very good smart zone corner as well. And I think a lot of defensive back coaches would agree they'd rather teach a guy zone as he gets older and watches more film than teach a guy to have to like process information quickly, be composed in the heat of the battle down the field. He checks those boxes. So I liked his tape. It's just there's still some stuff for him to develop for sure. And Cisse, by the way, coming in at my number 8 cornerback, would be someone I'm comfortable with at the end of the second round, as opposed to those first two guys we talked about were more true third round grades. But then we get to, I think, pretty much everybody's favorite corner to watch in this draft, and that's D'Angelo Pons out of Indiana. Coming in at 5'8.5", 182 pounds, tiny 29.5-inch arms. Yet here he is, cracking the top 10, declaring as a true junior and national champion out of Indiana. And even then, I think some people are going to say I'm too low on D'Angelo Pons, who comes in for me with a late second, early third round grade. And I think for me, it's just like I've fallen in love with so many of these tiny corners before, and then come to realize that there are definite physical limitations to a guy this size in the league. I mean, I especially think about Marcus Jones coming out of Houston is a part of my pro comp on D'Angelo Pons, but Kobe Durant, Amik Robertson, some of these guys that just had like incredible college tape, but all of them like under 5'9", certainly under 5'10", just short arms, They lack the size to consistently hang against bigger wide receivers. If you play them in the slot, they're going to get physically taken advantage of at times. And I said it especially on Marcus Jones coming out because he was in Derek Stingley's draft. I was like, dude, if you could put him in Derek Stingley's body, that's the best damn cornerback prospect you've ever seen, because when you're this small, you develop really good tendencies at this position because you have to compensate with your twitch and your mental response time and your zone IQ and your scrappiness. And it shows up in all these really good spots, but eventually you got to come out here and cover Mike Evans and AJ Brown and, tight ends if you're playing in the slot. And even if you are right in that guy's hip pocket and you're in perfect position, the best receivers with the best ball skills and good size in this league are going to, little boy you a little bit. They're going to moss you from time to time, and it just reduces your consistency and your ceiling. And for me, that drops Pons to a late second, early third round grade, as opposed to, I have seen people say, like, I would take him in the first round, and I'm just like, I just don't know that he's going to have that upside at the next level, but I think he's like ready to play, man, for a 21-year-old. Like, this dude knows what he's doing. He's frisky as all hell. He has an elite first step, one of the best 10-yard splits in this draft. He has a 43.5-inch vertical jump, which, like, look, that will help make up for some of what we talked about in true jump ball situations. A lot of the guys he's going to have to cover also have 40-inch vertical jumps and have 6 or 7 inches on him, but it's nice to know that he can jump that high. And he's got really good long speed as well. Not quite 4.3 flat, which was initially reported with him, which would have really blown me away, because I don't think he plays with like elite speed on tape, but he plays with more than enough and very, very good speed. 4.36 is what was officially reported coming out of that pro day, and I think that tracks much closer than 4.30 if we're being a little more picky about it. But to get away from some of the generalities of him just being a smaller corner and talk about more specifics on what he does really well, I mean, even though he is smaller, I think you can ask him to run pretty much any type of coverage. And that's kind of why I struggled with the pro comp on him a little bit, because you can see him running man, you can see him running true zone drops, you can see him running quarters, and it's like there's little shades of all these other, very solid undersized corners in the NFL, and I think Pons has a very nice balance about him. I think he's scrappy like an Amik Robertson, where he can get up and under your pads and press you off the line and kind of surprise you with his frisky jabs and quick feet to stay square and the good 4.36 speed to hang down the field man to man. I think that's probably what you trust him with the least on day one. Indiana ran almost exclusively like true spot drop zone stuff in their defensive system, so we didn't get to see him run a ton of man to man, but he doesn't quite have those reps. He's a little bit younger too. So maybe he can be closer to an Amik Robertson, where he's actually, kind of an underrated man corner at the next level. I think he's got the speed and the friskiness to do it. You are going to deal with some of that, length deficiency. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is how important it is to be able to play physical in man-to-man coverage. Those subtle, arm bumpers to slow guys down, the length to compete for contested catches. It's extremely important in those true man-to-man situations. So he's going to deal with some of those limitations there, just as he is in every aspect of his game. But I think in those true zone drop situations, he's very good. I'm not going to say he had elite zone IQ and that he was always flowing in front of passing lanes and, breaking down routes and taking stuff away from zone, but clearly a solid understanding from cover three, especially to take a lot of that stuff away, not bust coverages, all of that good stuff, keep his eyes looking for work, all that stuff you're looking for in zone coverage. So cover three happy teams will like D'Angelo Pons. You think of like the Rams and the Falcons system that run a lot of off cover three. Actually, he's very fitting in those types of roles. And then the true like match zone quarters, where you're just counting inside out and you know which guy you got, and it's very quickly, off zone turns into man match, and you got to click and close that space in a hurry. He's got that incredible first step. We know he sees the game well, and he can run quarters, absolutely. There was one thing I noticed on tape with him that kind of bothered me that I feel like you should be able to clean up pretty easily with him, but on a lot of those reps when they did run quarters, you would see him trigger on an out route or a dig route or a hitch route almost immediately, and then it was almost like he didn't have the conviction to fully tighten that space. He would take a first step downhill and then kind of stop himself. And it did create some open windows for quicker receivers and smarter quarterbacks that can complete timing throws. So there were actually some knocks on the quarters stuff that I watched from him. But again, you can see it in all those different coverage assignments that he can handle whatever you want to throw at him despite his lack of size. So I guess for me, I do look at the size as a likely limiting factor where he's never going to be like a dominant number one corner or even a true number one corner. But whether it's on the outside as a number two or you move him into the slot and you deal with some size limitations as a run defender, but he's frisky and he jumps bubble screens and he's a thorn in your side every play, there's going to be a spot in a lot of NFL defenses who are comfortable with the size deficiencies on pawns. And that takes me to my number 6 cornerback, who does have the same exact grade as my number 5 corner. So this is my number 6/5B, actually Colton Hood out of Tennessee. And I like Colton Hood a good bit, but a lot of people really like Colton Hood. I've seen him, maybe not so much recently, but I have seen him in top 20s of mock drafts, certainly a lot at the end of the first round. And I actually see Colton Hood as more of a true second round guy. I saw a lot of inconsistency with his tape that gives me a little bit of pause if we're talking about a top 30 draft pick. But a lot to like as well. I don't want to sell him short at the same time. But he is definitely, if you miss out on those top 2 guys and you want to bump and run outside cornerback, Colton Hood is absolutely going to be for you. And when you're talking about him jamming you at the line, staying attached down the field, having very good speed to hang, whether it's, down the sideline on a go ball or on a post or a deep cross, he can do that. He has enough length to do kind of what we maybe questioned if someone like Elijah Pons can do consistently, where he'll stay in your hip pocket. He's going to put that, hand on your hip and kind of stop you from being able to pull away if you are a little bit faster than someone like Colton Hood. And he can kind of feel the subtle movements of your hips to anticipate which direction you're about to cut. That's why length really matters man to man, and he's very comfortable with that. So again, if you're a true man-to-man team, you're going to have Colton Hood higher than, honestly, my next 3 corners, I think. But I'm not filling this out for a team-specific board. I'm going through my own system and every player in a vacuum, and then it's kind of do with the information as you're able to do and filter it for certain scheme fits. I would say cornerback is the most scheme-dependent position in the sport. Not that it doesn't matter for other positions, obviously, but especially at this position, it really matters. And with a player like Colton Hood, the man stuff is really nice. I didn't give him an elite man-to-man grade because it's not like he never lost. I don't think he's got elite size. He's not an elite athlete. He can be a little bit too much on the grabby side at times, and I want him to trust his feet a little bit more in a lot of these reps. But again, very good man corner. The other stuff, especially true zone coverage, it needs to be coached up. And if you're taking him to start right away as a top 30 to 35 pick, and you want to play cover 3 35-40% of your snaps, he just doesn't really get it yet. It's just true. And it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, yet you load up the tape and, okay, Tennessee for the most part ran up, had him running up and down the sideline man to man, or had him in match quarters where it's like, hey, you got that guy. Don't let him get away from you. He can do that, right? But they still would inevitably call some cover 3, and he's just kind of hanging out. Guys would run in-breakers and stop routes around him. He would kind of jump stuff and blow his zone discipline. It's just, look, zone coverage, it's something that you got to watch the tape. You got to kind of know what you're looking for. But when you go through enough games, you can see a guy versus some of these other corners on this list, and it's like, that guy understands zone coverage. That guy needs to be coached up there. So that is my criticism on Colton Hood. Doesn't mean he can't get there, right? Like I said earlier, a lot of DB coaches will say, give me the guy that can stay with someone one-on-one, that's got the size and the traits. We'll teach him how to play zone. Doesn't always happen, but it certainly can happen. And then the other thing that did kind of bother me with Colton Hood, compared to probably everybody on this list, is that he just really couldn't have cared less against the run. The amount of plays where it's 3 or 4 seconds into this thing and he's checked out, he doesn't care if it was a run play, he's staring down his assignment. Look, I get it. A lot of these systems, they say, you got that guy on the outside. If he does a runoff, it's not your problem. Everybody else on this list eventually would recognize that the opponent is running a runoff and try to go get involved against the run. Colton Hood was straight up disinterested against the run. And it would also show when guys were running at him and you want him to get off blocks and make a play. He isn't very physical to get off blocks either. He's kind of just like, tell me who I'm guarding. I'll take him out of the play to the best of my ability. I question if there's more to his game than just that. And what I know is 70, 80, 85% of the systems in the NFL are very zone-heavy systems that have started to put even more and more of an emphasis on finding the ball, being an impact against the run. And I think there's going to be some tape with Colton Hood that's a turnoff for some teams. Now, again, you're the Jets, you're the Lions, you're the Chiefs. You're going to frickin' love Colton Hood. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder with Colton Hood, with a lot of players at this position group. But that's who I see with him. And then we have, tied in terms of grades, and this is a great example of trying to understand the difference in scheme fits here. Keith Abney out of Arizona State is an inverse analysis, I think, of Colton Hood. Maybe not necessarily with the run defense stuff. I think there's some questions there that we can talk about. Not quite as exaggerated on tape as Colton Hood, but especially when you're talking about his size and what types of coverages you're going to ask him to run and what sort of system you want to plug him into. Keith Abney out of Arizona State is extremely different, yet carries the same grade and a true second-round evaluation for me. And some pro comps on this list I like better than others. This is one I really like. It's Darius Williams, who had an outstanding 10-year career as an undersized corner who, as these off-zone quarters-heavy systems have become more and more prominent in the league, Darius Williams' value kept shooting up and up and up. I see a eerily familiar player with Keith Abney, just shy of 5'10", 188 pounds, 30-inch arms, pretty good weight at that size, but overall, he's not going to blow anybody away with his measurables. Even the 40 time, 4.45 in today's economy, if you will, of 40 times. That's pretty smack dab average for what these guys are running. So we're not talking about a size speed demon here. What we're talking about is someone that has outstanding tape and truly understands this position and understands zone assignments, spacing from zone coverage, understands what quarterbacks are looking to do to exploit the coverage that you're in, and how to mess with those quarterbacks to take that stuff away. Keith Abney understands that at a very high level in his true zone spot drops, and he ran a bunch of different stuff at Arizona State. So you'll see him like cover two. He's got that perfect spacing between the flat and the whole shot where quarterbacks just can't quite feel, if he's committing one way or another. He causes that hesitation, or he will drift back and get a hand on a ball. From cover three, like, he understands who might be coming his way, but he's got his eyes inside towards the seam and like gets that's a weakness. If his curl flat defender's not going to be there, he'll go make a play. He's an active zone defender that will take stuff away without compromising his coverage. It's very impressive stuff. And then the quarters stuff from him is brilliant as well. The biggest thing you're looking for with an off-zone quarters coverage defender is both the mental and physical reaction time to snap and squeeze those routes underneath. So when you're playing with 10 yards off, can you take away an out route, a hitch route, a dig route? Can you recognize the route break mentally, send that signal to your body, and then also have the burst, the acceleration, the foot speed, the click and close ability to take that space away. And then you also have to be able to do that smart enough to not fall for double moves and get beat over the top. It's finding that perfect balance. And I think for a true junior, all these guys are pretty damn young, by the way. Keith Abney declaring as a true junior here. Very impressed where he's at with the mental side of things. There's so many plays on his tape where it's like he's playing through the Matrix, or he knew what the play was ahead of time. A receiver begins his break and he's like running the route for the guy. And that even shows up man to man. Even if he doesn't have the length or the speed that you desire man to man, you're not going to fool this guy. So you can play him man to man, and it shows up in his like ability to mirror footwork off the line as a press player too. So I really like Keith Abney. I think the main reason I gave him the nod over Colton Hood is I just think there's a lot more teams that are going to value a Keith Abney, who I think is about as good of a player as Colton Hood. It's just in an entirely different system. Like, this literally just comes down to, do you want to be a press, jam, bump and run team? Then you want Colton Hood. Are you an off-zone style defense like 25 teams in the league are today? You're going to prefer Keith Abney. Now, to say one critical thing on him is I do think he needs to get better at keeping his eyes on the run, because he sees the game so well. I was honestly surprised how uninvolved he was as a run defender sometimes. And he is a little bit smaller to block shed as well. So I do want to see him kind of get better in that department. But overall, really a nice player. I love the Darius Williams comp. I see an extremely similar player there. But let's go to my number 4 corner. We have one more tie here on the list, who's going to have the same grade as my number 3 corner. But we've got Chris Johnson here out of San Diego State. And he's been a little bit of a late riser. I've seen some of the big draft names floating his name as a likely late first rounder, and I get it. And I have had kind of an internal debate of like, do I need to bump his grade up even more? Because I don't really have a whole lot of negative things to say about Chris Johnson, other than, he didn't play in the best level of competition. And I think the one thing on tape that maybe I have a slight pause with that I've really started to value is, does he get his head around when he's targeted down the field? And forgive me for not answering that yes or no for everybody we've talked about here. You can't always get a firm answer for that from 3 or 4 games that you watch on these guys anyway. But I do think with Chris Johnson, it is probably the biggest question from his tape is, can he play poised enough against NFL wide receivers that are going to attack the ball over him? Again, didn't see a lot of them on his schedule at San Diego State. Can he get that head around, avoid those DPIs, avoid guys making tough catches on him I've been burned by players that were really sticky in coverage, really balanced profiles that just didn't turn their head around down the field. Saw a lot of reps from Chris Johnson where it's like, dude, come on, you're right there. Like, let's get that head around and make a play here. That's probably the one holdup. Now, other than that, he is an extremely clean profile. Really good size, really good athlete, ran a 4.4, really smooth athlete. He's got the oily hips. He's got good burst, really fast feet, decent enough play strength, nothing crazy, but more than enough to translate that side of the game to the next level. And then he's got a lot of the same stuff we praised Abney for in terms of amazing zone tape. Like, honestly, just copy and paste all the things I praised Abney for. Jumping stuff from cover 3, that spacing from cover 2, a defense that asked him to run a little bit of everything, whether it was match quarters, cover 3, cover 2, hell, even inverted cover 2 where you're dropping back into a deep half. Chris Johnson has all of that incredible zone feel, zone IQ for a true junior coming out of San Diego State. And likewise, I love the way he jumps stuff from quarters and underneath routes. Like, he takes stuff away in a hurry without compromising, getting beat on double moves and being too aggressive and that kind of stuff. So all of these off-zone quarters style split safety defenses are going to love Chris Johnson's tape. And I think he can be an even better man-to-man corner than maybe the C+ ranking I have on him, or say a Keith Abney. He is bigger, faster. It's just, I maybe saw him run man coverage like 8 times in the 3 games I watched on him. Like, one of those deals where they didn't ask him to really run man to man. So it's not that he can't do it. It's what was he asked to do in college. But I think inevitably when you haven't repped a lot of man-to-man, especially at that level of competition, like, there's probably going to be an adjustment period right away. But I think his man could be much better at the next level. He's got all the traits to do it. So I really like Chris Johnson. He ended up with a top 50 grade for me. So that's basically saying, if he goes with the last few picks of the first round, assuming the board falls a certain way and he's a good scheme fit, I get it. Ideally, like, if you're being nitpicky about value, I probably see him more in the 33 to 45 range in terms of like true best player available, but really good player. Another guy I really like my pro comp on, it's someone that used to play in San Diego for the Chargers, Casey Hayward. Now, I wrote down shades of Casey Hayward because Hayward was like a top 5 corner for a few years, but I see a lot of similarities in terms of like the brilliant zone stuff, someone that's a good overall athlete, but nothing special, not going to blow you away with his size or his speed, but really good paired with really good fluidity and a really sharp mind for understanding what teams are trying to do to you, when you can take risks in zone. I don't think it's crazy that he could be a top 10 corner in the NFL, especially in all of these zone-heavy systems. So I do really like him. We'll just see how that kind of transition to the next level goes. And if what I saw with him not always getting his head around when targeted down the field, maybe being a little bit less composed in phase when targeted down the field, we'll see if that surfaces as an issue or not. But beyond that, really nice player here. But I do still have someone that shares the same grade there, tied for my number 3 corner, but my number 3A corner here, Avion Terrell out of Clemson. It's been kind of torpedoing in terms of his draft stock within the last week because he finally attempted his 40-yard dash time, pulled up with a hammy, charted a 4.64, and now everybody's panicking. And while it is a valued part of my process to get confirmed 40 times, I think clearing a 4.5 40 is something that matters to me when I put my list together. There are so many guys that didn't hit that benchmark, that everybody loved their college tape, and they just weren't fast and explosive enough at the next level to keep pace with NFL wide receivers. I think at this position especially, it is It's a reason I put that 40 time up here in all of these critical kind of metrics for these guys. I do think it matters. So while I would love to have a confirmed 40 time on Avion Terrell, I don't think he's got 4.64 speed. I don't know that he's a burner. Maybe he would have run 4.48, 4.49, but I know he's faster than 4.64. So you acknowledge that it happened. It really didn't impact my grade on him too much. If anything, the concern there is he missed a game in 2025, and now we've got maybe some soft tissue questions on him. But overall, I think he's fast enough to play at the next level. It's not like you see him on tape and guys are just exploiting his speed left and right. In fact, he made a lot of good plays running with guys down the field. Now, he spent a decent amount of time from the slot where he's not going to be exposed quite as much, like trying to prevent a vertical stack on the outside. So again, there's maybe some added questions there from all that. But it didn't blow up my grade on Avion Terrell. And at the end of the day, we had to talk about that and get it out of the way. At the end of the day, I still really like Avion Terrell. AJ Terrell's brother, he's quick as hell for a true junior. There's a lot to really like with his just, we've talked about it a lot in this video to this point. The value of like someone that sees information, processes it, in an absolute split second, and then is able to relay it to their body where they also have the burst and the foot speed and the oily hips to just stay attached, to be a sticky cover player, mirror all of these sudden movements, whether it's footwork off the line and press coverage, or staying attached in a guy's hip pocket man-to-man, or from off zone to be able to break down on these underneath routes from 10 yards off. He really does those things well from a coverage perspective, and he's still very young. I do think he's got a lot to learn in terms of zone coverage. And just to clarify too, I know I suggested to you guys earlier to read my descriptions for these different qualifiers, but this year it is different. I have separated true spot drop zones as a grade from quarters because they are very different things. Quarters is much more simple in terms of who you got. We're trying to squeeze that space on that guy and stay attached to that one guy, or if he cuts inside, you're passing it off. But it's very quickly like zone match, off zone quarters is very different from we're dropping you into cover 3. We're dropping you into cover 2. You got your eyes on the quarterback. You're seeing what's breaking down around you. How do you mentally process all that stuff? How do you feel that space around you? It's extremely different. So yes, cover 4 is technically a zone defense in what it would be charted, but I do evaluate that differently from when we're dropping Avion Terrell into a cover 3 and doing some of that stuff. And I do think there's a lack of experience there. There's not a ton of those reps in Clemson's defense, and guys would just kind of cut and break, and route concepts would get him, and they would complete passes into his assignment, into his area, where a lot of these other guys like Keith Abney and Chris Johnson would understand what opposing concepts are trying to do to exploit his zone assignment. Avion Terrell, not quite there yet in those calls, but quarters, man-to-man, he can absolutely be a sticky coverage defender. You hope the zone stuff gets better, as we've talked about with some of these other guys. And the other thing is he does truly have inside-out flexibility. I actually, while he didn't run that 40 time or successfully run that 40 time where you want it to be, one thing that Avion Terrell did accomplish in this pre-draft process is he came in well north of 5'10" at the combine, 5'10" and a half, 186 pounds, and 31-inch arms. Might not sound like much, but there was a concern that he was going to be like maybe 5'10" flat or even under 5'10" to be 180 pounds and have really short arms. If you want him to play in the slot, where I think his best tape probably is, I think he was kind of riding a thin line heading into the pre-draft process in terms of, is he big enough to project as like a solid run defending slot? I think he cleared those benchmarks for me, and his tape is really good from the slot. He's got really good processing of the run. He fills the run. He is not afraid to tackle. Yeah, he's not the biggest guy, so he can get caught up on blocks. He can get overwhelmed trying to tackle bigger guys, but he's good enough at those things, and he's kind of got that maniac slot mentality. I think he can absolutely play outside corner for you as well, but I do think that flexibility is very valuable. The market hasn't quite caught up to it, but in a lot of these defenses, the slot corner is arguably more important than your outside corner because you want to stay in nickel defense. You want a guy that can be your slot corner, but also help you get to third downs, be an extension of your linebacking group, fill the run, get off blocks, that kind of stuff. And if you're calling quarters coverage, that slot corner, his responsibility more times than not is a lot harder than your outside off zone, perimeter corners, because you got to defend two-way goes. You got to have range. You got to, go sideline to sideline. Like there's a lot of defenses where the slot position is actually, even though the market hasn't caught up, probably more valuable than your outside corners. So to be able to play that, but also be someone that can play outside, I really like that about Avion Terrell. And I think that all comes together to say that he's got a really high floor. I understand the 40 time is going to be scary for some people. Trust your eyes with him as long as the doctors say, yep, it's just a, bad timing with the hamstring stuff. We're not too worried about it long term. Trust your eyes. He's a good enough athlete. He's scrappy as hell. I think he'll get better as a zone defender. And I just feel very good when I draft Avion Terrell, even if he doesn't have, sky's the limit type of upside, kind of like our top two corners on this list. Like I said, there's depth in this class. We've talked about that depth, but we have here towards the top a really tough decision to be made for who the best corner in this draft is. And at the end of the day, I don't think it matters all that much. I think both Mansour Delane, who came in number 2 for me, and Jermod McCoy, who's going to be my number 1, obviously. Both these guys have like all-pro potential. Both are like scheme agnostic, and both are plug-and-play starters. I really like both these guys. Mansour Delane came in number 2 for me because I don't think he's quite as high upside as McCoy. That's really the split there. But again, we're talking about two guys that I could absolutely see making all-pro teams someday. So take that with a grain of salt. I had to pick somebody. Let's start with Mansour Delane, who's my number 2. He's just under 6 feet tall, 5'11", and 4/5 inches. A little lighter, 185 pounds, little bit shorter arms, 30 inches. So he's a little bit more on the smaller side. And that's probably the extent of where I don't see him having quite as much upside as McCoy, who's just a little bit taller, longer, bigger. I guess if there's another divider there, it's that Delane's a little bit older. He's 22 years old. He broke out in his 4th year at LSU, whereas Jermod McCoy is still 20. He doesn't turn 21 until August, and he broke out as a 19-year-old in the SEC at Tennessee. Again, we are absolutely splitting hairs with two guys that are inside the top 10 of my final big board. Well, I guess it's not technically final, but right now, McCoy is number 6 and Delane is number 8 on my big board that I shared on Twitter about a week ago. So that's the caliber of players we're talking about here. These are two of the best players in the draft, but let's focus on Delane here. And even though he came in just under 6 feet tall by a fifth of an inch, he's one of these rare corners that isn't just a height speed package. I mean, we talked about some of those guys with like Igbinosun at number 9. If you are tall and fast, he ran a 4.38 at his pro day. I think it shows on tape, but you also have incredible lateral movement skills, that's where we get into rare territory of all-pro corners who can truly do it all. And then you need to see the proper, mental side of the game as well, on top of the physical side of things, so that you can ask him to do anything in your coverage structures. And Mansour Delane has all of that. The off-zone stuff for him is outstanding. Copy and paste all of the stuff we said about Chris Johnson and Keith Abney, really gets it when he's got his eyes facing the quarterback and there's routes breaking and adjusting and moving in front of him. He flows in front of routes. He'll jump routes when he needs to. Understands that spacing and how opposing offenses are trying to attack him from off quarters assignments. Probably the best true quarters assignment corner on this list, although we've talked about some good ones and McCoy's really good at it too. But in terms of anticipating routes underneath him, we talked about that incredible burst, foot speed, ability to flip his hips, click and close. The mental and physical reaction to squeeze those routes from off quarters is special stuff from him. We've brought up the ball skills as maybe a question for someone like Chris Johnson. Not with Mansour Delane. He is poised, in phase. You target him down the field. He's not overly grabby. At times he can be. We'll see if he can clean some of that stuff up. But generally speaking, man, he trusts his positioning. He gets his head around. He finds the ball. He takes the ball away. He disrupts passes. And man-to-man, he's really good too. I wouldn't describe him as elite or unbeatable man-to-man, but very sticky and still room to improve as, yes, a senior, but still a young guy. I mean, it's hard to pick holes in his game. And then the other thing too, I mentioned, the off-zone stuff is special with him. He's great as a press corner too. More specifically, just playing press bail technique. The difference between that and press jam is obviously we want you to throw those hands and knock back the receiver and be more physical at the line. Press bail is more, you're mirroring footwork, you're turning your hips and running and matching footwork. Just chef's kiss with his press bail technique, physical ability that we've talked about with him. You don't really get away from him off the line. And it's got to just be annoying for some of these wide receivers because he's super patient. You don't catch him leaning one way or the other. His feet are so fast. So even if you have a perfect release technique, you've got those fancy feet off the line, he just ain't having it. Even if he has a slight misstep, his foot fair and his hips and his acceleration to immediately recover from any false step, which he often doesn't even have because his technique is so clean. He is glued to you, and it's like a shadow, as opposed to some of these press jam guys that are in there and, being physical. He's just right on top of you always. So it's just annoying to try to get away from this guy in press bail, which is, coaches are going to love that plug and play ability. He's just a super clean prospect, just doesn't have incredible size or play strength. And that's a slight ding on him. Whereas my number one corner, Jermod McCoy, he's just a little bit bigger and I think even more athletic than what we just talked about. So my pro comp on Delane is someone that's made all pro teams, Tre'Davious White. Not a scouting the helmet thing there. I actually thought of that, and then I was like, crap, Tre'Davious White also played at LSU. And, people don't like when you compare him to someone out of the same school, but it just worked out that way. With Jermod McCoy, watching him gave me an almost identical reaction to when I watched Christian Gonzalez coming out of Oregon, where it's that's a corner built in a lab. Gonzalez was a little bit bigger, but McCoy, likewise, north of 6 feet tall, 31.25-inch arms, little bit skinnier, but he also was playing at 19 years old at Tennessee. There's room to maybe add 5-6 pounds reasonably. But like, man, we can get into footwork and grabbiness and technique and zone IQ, and God knows we will and have done that. If you're going to be an elite corner at the NFL level, you just have to hit a certain level of athletic ability at a certain size that only a handful of guys, in the last couple of decades have cleared. Christian Gonzalez was one of those guys coming out, and I still to this day cannot believe he went in the teens of the draft. Jermon McCoy is one of those guys. And not even so much the long speed. He's got plenty of it. He ran a 4.40 at his pro day. But very similar to what we talked about with Delane. The movement skills, man, the oily hips. I feel like I've sold you guys short, and I don't think I've said oily hips enough in this video, but God, does Jermon McCoy have some oily hips, man. And the foot speed, the ability to match and mirror breaks and just stay attached, to be a sticky defender from an athletic standpoint. You just don't see it, dude. And you load up Jermon McCoy's McTape. A lot of it applies to Mansour Delane. And then you watch the other guys and it's like, yeah, those two guys, they're different. They are the creme de la creme. Those are the guys we need to take at the top of the draft, and they just don't make them like these two guys. McCoy especially being a little bit bigger, and to do what he did as a 19-year-old at Tennessee, you have to remind yourself when you watch his tape, it's like kind of a tough balance, and we'll talk about the fact that he didn't play this year, but when you do watch his tape, you got to remind yourself, like, dude, he was this good at 19. And there's just not really anything on the tape to be like, yeah, he wouldn't have been able to do that again. I mean, he was out there doing it against Alabama and SEC competition. And to be fair, yeah, in his last game of his college career, Jeremiah Smith did get him deep. It's Jeremiah freaking Smith, man. Going against another 19-year-old, like, okay, he had bad rep against Jeremiah Smith, but he went toe-to-toe with him. Again, at that age. I get it if you don't want to take that leap with him. I really do. I'm not even saying that in like, you're a coward or, you do you type of way. Like, I truly do understand if you're just like, yeah, but he didn't play this year. It's been 15 months since we've seen him play. I'd rather take the guy that maybe isn't quite as gifted. It's a little safer with Delane maybe. I get it. I do, but I'm willing to trust the tape that we saw. It'll have been almost 2 years since his ACL injury, and you see him moving at his pro day, running a 4.4, but even more so the drills that he was running, like he was turning, he was moving just as fluidly as he looked in his sophomore year tape. I think that athlete's in there. ACL recoveries these days don't scare me that much. And I even at times got impatient with, him not working out at the combine and being, really taking his time to get to that pro day. But he had to kill it at his pro day if that was going to be the process. And he absolutely did. And I'm on board. I have sold a lot of his technique and IQ short as well, really focusing on his athletic ability, but it's an essential part of this conversation. I mean, he has all of the stuff we've talked about in terms of seeing things the right way, playing poised down the field, getting his head around to find the ball, zone IQ, quick response time from quarters, really good route mirroring ability, man-to-man, all with room to improve, considering his age, a bit of the fog of war from this final year. Maybe he would have taken a step back. At the same time, maybe he would have leaped forward, and we are talking about him as the clear-cut number one player in this draft, and like genuinely one of the best cornerback prospects we've seen come out in recent memory. I don't think that would have been all that crazy based on how impressive his game was in that sophomore season. And from a run defense standpoint, I think he's one of the better players on this list as well. Getting involved against the run, good ability to get off blocks, really involved tackler. it's just really hard to find weaknesses in his game other than he didn't play last year. But you go back, you watch the tape, take a leap of faith that that's who you're getting. And I'm going to take that leap of faith with him as my number one corner. But if Delane's your number one guy because he's not that far behind him and you'd rather not on a guy that didn't play this last year, again, totally understand that as well. All I know is these two guys are freaking awesome and should go really high in this draft. Like maybe top 10, top 12, because I think they are at a premium position at corner and grayed out as such in this draft class. So there is your top 10 cornerback rankings video. Let me know what you guys think of my list. Who do you think got snubbed? Again, if you want my write-ups on those players that you do think got snubbed, you want my thoughts and opinions, I've got 27 cornerbacks watched so far. Going to get to a few more here before the draft as well. But if you want my rankings, write-ups, grades on all those players, all the players I've watched in this draft, do check out my Patreon, my draft guide over there. You can support the channel and get that exclusive content in the process, where I will be doing 7-round mock drafts for all 8 divisions, by the way, in the week leading up to the draft, which is just around the corner. So that's over at Patreon. Hit that like button on the way out, please. It really helps me out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon for our next positional breakdown. Cheers.